We should be streaming. Is it going? That is the question. Yes, we are live. It is incredible. Hello, everybody. Sorry I'm 15 minutes late. Today we are talking about capitalism. This topic actually came about when I was, because I was having a conversation with another gentleman on another server about the minimum wage, and it got my gears turning, and I realized that minimum wage is a bit too narrow for minds as large as the ones that occupy this server, so I figured we'd just go whole hog and talk about capitalism. The few questions I want to hit on is, how is capitalism properly defined? Because I've noticed that that's actually one of the biggest issues when we have conversations about this sort of thing. As well as if there's any better alternatives to capitalism, if it's exploitative or if it's free, and generally your opinions on it, and if you think you have a better alternative. And I figured we will have that conversation, and this is a pretty contentious issue for a lot of people, so I imagine the conversation will fuel itself. But a couple of our guests were talking before the live started, so I'd like to get hot takes from Doolittle and then Nivik, and then we'll go to Swaxy, just about how you feel about capitalism at large, how you define it, and just your general take on our current economic system in the U.S. of A and throughout most of the world in some capacity.
So I think capitalism is essentially corollary to the principle of self-ownership. So if you own yourself, then that means you own the consequences of your actions, and one of the consequences of your actions is the creation of value and the creation of property. And so capitalism is essentially an extension of sovereignty of the individual and self-ownership, and that necessitates the existence of personal property, which essentially means if you own the good and the bad of your actions. One of the goods of your actions is the value of the work that you've undergone, or the value of the property that you created. So capitalism is just an economic system that respects that right to personal property that you create yourself, and your agency in the disposition of that property however you see fit. Okay. And that's pretty much the simplest version of it that I can give you.
Okay, so the common response I hear to that sort of thing is basically, it can't be free and you can't own yourself when your alternative to working in the capitalist system is essentially starving and dying. That's usually what I hear. And I don't want to respond to that just yet. I just want to throw out that devil's advocate point into the air. Nivik, you were here second. Doolittle was here first. You were here second. Tell me what you think about the whole affair. Are you a fan? Or are you not a fan?
Talk to a lot of people about capitalism. A lot of times they'll say, it's about the individual, and people that are social, it's about the group. And my view on it is that it is both. It's the seller selling and trying to convince people to buy that is beneficial to their life, something that's beneficial to their lives, that is beneficial to society. And I think the overall goal is for society well-being to progress. And it's a balance of well, I see it as a the individuals are separate from the group, so I just see I see it's a balance on both sides. It's not about just you doing whatever you can to make profit at the expense. It's a mutual compromise in where you get one party gets what's beneficial to them, and other person get what's beneficial as well. and one person being the individual, the others the group, everybody would benefit as a result, because the individual is not separate from the group. That viewpoint of you just making a profit by trying to sell in gain, in making money, I don't see that it's just that perspective. I see it as the buyer as well. The buyer can rip you off in making gain in getting something that is very expensive and paying you very little for it, or they can buy something that's very cheap, and get potentially ripped off.
So this actually introduces Nivek, this introduces a interesting question, and you just talked about how people can be ripped off in value, and I guess that raises the question that's also a big part of capitalism, is like the proper way to calculate value, because you're assuming that people can be ripped off, and I think everybody agrees with that intuitively to an extent, but the whole idea of capitalism is that there's almost no such thing as inherent value. The true value of something is whatever the buyer is willing to buy it for and the seller is willing to sell it for, and that's where things end. And I think this is a big part of the conflict between people who are against capitalism and people who are not. But it sounds to me like you're a begrudging fan. Is that a fair assessment of where you're at, despite all of its flaws?
When you say inherent value, it's my view of value is like it is also created. Like what didn't exist before, it existed through somebody coming up with an innovation.
Sure. All right. Nivek,
I get that some things are worth more.
Sure.
To others.
Sure. Yeah. Nivek, loved hearing from you, man, but we're getting more people in here. John Boy, you are a recent addition to this conversation. However, you have a face cam, which immediately promotes you to the front of the line, because that is the policy here. So we're talking about capitalism, which is very intentionally vague, I know. Basically, the question for you is, are you a fan? Is it moral? Do you think we have anything better? Do you have anything better? Just what's your general take on our current economic system? And if you have any improvements, I'd love to hear any ideas. Just generally, how you feel and what you think.
Yeah, for sure. I think it is vague, and the intentionality of that is obvious. I think there are probably multiple iterations of what we could call capitalism.
That's another question. How would you define it?
Yeah, I think it's often described as an economic system where the free markets provide some type of a competitive or regulatory driving force, and the idea being, as you were describing, that there's an opportunity for educated buyers to make decisions, and the value of goods is based on what an educated consumer is willing to pay for. So there's some assumptions there. Overall, I think obviously it has its drawbacks, but it seems to be one of the better economic systems on hand. I think the challenges that are inherent to capitalism, typically for me aligns along where the state plays a role from a regulatory perspective, and striking that balance, I think, is a key part of success. The last caveat I'll add in terms of capitalism is I think it's what is or is not the best system has changed over time as the economy has shifted towards more of a global economy. So now obviously we live in a world where the ability to provide legislative or governmental oversight to a company within a given country is way different now than it ever has been. And I think that creates some new challenges for capitalism. But overall, my opinion is I think it's the best economic system we've found so far.
You said something interesting. I'm trying to remember what it was. That's gonna bother me. Oh, it'll come back to me. It's okay.
I'm sure it'll come back up.
Yeah, Mace, you've been sitting in here a while, and you. Oh, I know. You said we have to strike a balance between government oversight and free markets. Is something that you said. I'm curious. I assume that you believe we're not in perfect equilibrium at the moment. So, assuming that, which side do you think we're tipped to? Too much regulation or not enough?
It's a matter of quantity. I think it's a matter of the type of regulation.
Fair.
So, I think there's probably areas in which we're over-regulating and not allowing the markets to make decisions for themselves. And then there's probably areas where we're not creating the right incentive structure for corporations, right? And I think one of the obvious things that stick out where regulation probably could play a more helpful role is, there's obviously a lot of very large corporations that take advantage of consumerism in our economy and other developed nations that probably aren't paying their fair share of taxes due to all kinds of, well-designed loopholes, which, I think could probably be called into question. So for those anti-capitalists among us, I would say that's an example of something, that could be improved upon in our capitalist system.
Yeah, so I agree with that, and I used to be more of a ANCAP than I am now, because I thought it was inherently moral. I've now come to the conclusion that it's completely amoral because all it does is reflect the wants of human beings. And my personal theory is that in the beginning, all we wanted was shelter and food and warmth and security. So capitalism was really, really good. And now us in the Western world are so content and rich and fat and not subject to the predations of nature so much that what we want we've gotten bored, and now what we want isn't always inherently good, and sometimes we want iPhones that are $200 cheaper because they're made by slaves in China, and our value systems are askew, and capitalism reflects the flawed morality of humans, and yeah.
On the moral question, I would describe it as amoral.
Yeah, I think we agree there. So Mace, I'm sorry, I was going to you, but John Boy had his face cam on, so he got precedence. But I'd love for your take on the whole matter, and also if actually, I'm not going to ask that question. I want your take on the matter. How you feel about capitalism, if you're a fan.
No, please ask the question.
Here's the question. Is there any difference that you know of between the UK, which is where you are, if I'm not mistaken, and the US in regards to their feelings about capitalism and their treatment of their economies?
No idea.
Okay, that's why I didn't ask, because it wasn't really fair for me to assume that you know that.
Yeah, I don't know, sorry. I'm a big fan of capitalism, though.
Sick, short and sweet. Do you have any notes, let's say you're giving capitalism a grade. Do you have any notes for it on what it can do better that we haven't heard yet? Because I have a few.
No, I don't think so.
All right, perfect. LL, I remember you from a few other conversations. So I'm kind of curious what you're going to say on this particular matter. How do you define capitalism, and do you think it's moral? Do you think you got anything better? Tell us what you think.
But I don't really have much to say about capitalism. I do support it, but I don't think you can, I don't think you can make moral, perhaps you can make moral claims or moral judgments in an economic system, but I don't think an economic system is inherently, can be categorized as moral or not. But
that's interesting.
Yeah, I support capitalism. I suppose things I would like to change, if I could, is, let's see. I don't know. I really don't know. So.
Oh, come on. There's no way there's nothing you would like to change about our current economic standing. I don't believe you. I don't believe you for a second.
All right, let's see. Perhaps
Hats?
this is the thing. Like, you can't, if you try to change anything about capitalism, I don't know, you'd sort of violate the idea of a free market. Perhaps, I don't know.
That's true.
Because
So
this
true.
is the thing, right? Like, firms are they're motivated by two factors: the lowest possible marginal cost and profit maximization. So if marginal costs are lower in China, they will go there, right? And so what are you going to do about that? You're going to say, you can't, you can't move your business offshore or some funny, I don't know. So
Yeah.
it's
So
and if you make a minimum wage argument, then you would increase unemployment.
right. It's
So
funny actually. I was having this
I don't know,
conversation
yeah.
with another person about minimum wage and unemployment. Apparently, like a decent amount of economists like don't believe that anymore, and they believe that we can like raise minimum wage, and nothing will happen, which is interesting because I had to dig into some
Whoa.
research. That's just modern economic theory for you, I guess. But you said something interesting, and I've been playing with this idea of protectionism for a while. I was thinking of what's the best way that the government can minimize all this, the horrific side effects of offshoring, which is primarily loss of like strong manufacturing jobs, which are both bad for employment because it forces everybody in America to do high information jobs that a lot of people simply just can't do intellectually or training wise. And two, it makes us incredibly reliant on foreign nations and not self sufficient. And three, it makes us reliant on immoral business practices. And something like protectionism, where you have very high tariffs and very high penalties for US based companies that offshore their stuff to foreign nations, might be a good idea because you're not messing with the market internally in America. You're kind of setting guardrails around it rather than putting like big barriers inside of it. And I thought that that might be a potential way to mitigate some of the less nice qualities of capitalism. Fango Jet, you were next anyway, but you turned on your face cam, which makes you even more immediately my priority. Please give me your hot takes on capitalism and maybe even protectionism, since I just kind of threw that idea out there. What do you think? How do you define it? Do you have any better ideas? Tell us.
So, I think a lot of what our grandparents worry about is that, a lot of the younger generation is losing hope in capitalism and faith in that sort of system. And there's a whole subreddit based to like, communism and stuff like that, which I think is like the extreme response to that. But I think the war of ideas and balancing these two systems has already been finalized. I think capitalism is good. I think it incentivizes people to contribute to society. What I don't like is this late stage capitalism that we're seeing, sort of this like venture capitalism where basically everything is a giant pyramid scheme. So I guess if I could change something about the system, I would wish that everything wasn't monopolized. I would wish that you could still go to like a mom and pop restaurant and a mom and pop like shop and everything would function that way. But it seems like, now there's a Chili's and an Applebee's on every corner, and now everyone gets their shit from Amazon. So I think that this like Ponzi scheme of wealth gains to the top is what you see from that. And so I don't know. I would like to see, I guess, like less monopolization and more spread out economic flow, if that makes sense. I don't know. That's
Sure.
where I'm at with it.
Sure. This
I
is
don't really see
again.
capitalism separate from the group. This maximized gain of the individual. The mindset of it's about the strong individual. It's also about the group that you're selling to. I don't know. It's like I always try to like to try to completely understand, like people always use the word capitalism, but it's almost as if I think like the definition it kind of moves. You know what I mean? And sometimes it changes too. In where, like, I mean, like, if the way you do capitalism change, I mean, the definition, I mean, would therefore change as well.
What do you mean by that? How do you think the definition has changed over time exactly? I mean, I see what you mean. Like, while it's kind of been a fundamental idea in the West that, like, you know, the individual is like the cornerstone of the state and has like inherent dignity that must be like respected. Could you just elaborate on what exactly you mean? Like, I agree we've been a bit hyper individualized, but I feel like capitalism has always been kind of that way. What changes have you seen? Because I could be missing something.
Okay. If you there's a balance between the group and its needs and the individual that's selling, and they're not exclusive from each other. You have to care about the environment and the people around you, and it's kind of like there has to be a balance between that. You can't just be like, I'm just going to pay people nothing, or make them be, you know, and just have them be slaves. It's not, you know, you people as with the.
Did he cut out for anyone else?
Like
There
a
it is.
I don't know. I'm losing my thought, but I'm just saying, like, as a consumer, you don't want a person to corner the market in a way and pay nothing to an employee.
So
You know, it's kind of like, because you're not going to have no type of, if you do that, you're not going to have drive for innovation.
right, and I think this dovetails pretty well with what Fango Jet was saying. You both seem to be centering on the idea that competition is basically essential to capitalism. It's what keeps people from being slaves, and it's what keeps innovation rolling. And I mean, I tend to agree. It's another small intervention into capitalism that I'm kind of in favor of is trespassing laws, basically, and things of that nature I'm much more open to than you know, the massive tax stuff, because one penalizes like wealth and the other one penalizes anti-competitiveness, and those are two different things. So I mean I agree, and I think in today's world you have big tech and you have your Amazon, and while Amazon is criminally underrated because it can send literally anything anywhere in the world in like under a few days, which is incredible, it still does own like a massive share of the market, and which allows it to do anti-competitive things.
But with the pandemic, you did have a bit of a shift where I think the power dynamic with consumer and employers, because nobody's working and they can demand more wage.
Right,
There,
but right,
there's a bit like, well, you're gonna have to give me some, you know, some
that
goodies.
that might screw over everybody with inflation, though. We'll see. The jury's still out on that one. But you're right. There has been a bit of a shift. Labor has gotten more expensive due to the pandemic and some of the welfare that got handed out, and therefore they have a little bit more. The labor has a bit more bargaining power. But also during the pandemic, you kind of saw kiosks popping up, like people's jobs being automated away largely. Which also kind of screws over labor to an extent, because like, yeah, okay, they get paid more, but now there's less jobs, which is kind of what we were talking about with the issues of raising minimum wage in the first place. So it's kind of an interesting balancing act there that I think you hit on well, Nivik. Daotsu, you hopped in. We're talking about capitalism, as vague as that sounds. I want you to tell me how you define it, how you think it's properly defined. If you think it's a good system, if you think it's moral, and what you would do to change it or replace it, if that's what tickles your fancy. And if we don't have anyone else come in, I'm going to start playing devil's advocate real hardball, and we should have some fun there. But Daotsu, please give us your hot takes, bless us with your wisdom.
Well, defining capitalism, I feel like, is kind of difficult. If I was going to define it as... I would want to include competition in there somewhere, because I feel like competing creating a market of competing groups or conglomerates of people that use like supply demand to use demand as fuel in order to innovate, both scientifically and just general stuff in day-to-day life, to improve the lives of the general day-to-day people.
Dan, can I add to your competition comment? When you take out, when like people see capitalism of taking out everybody, and you not have competition, you wouldn't be driving innovation because you don't have nobody to worry about, to compete with, and you don't necessarily have to innovate.
And generally, like, I don't know if you want, like, people disagree over what pure capitalism is. So I generally just think of it as anarchy with money. but if you want something vague enough to capture pure capitalism, I think it would have to be something along those lines. But generally, the way capitalism expresses itself is as mixed with other ideas, whether they're moral principles of the culture or market dynamics, like getting rid of monopolies, because I think that's where you were going, Nivik. We generally try to break monopolies to increase innovation.
That's kind of social, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I would say, yeah, that is vaguely social.
Okay.
So I don't think there's a separation between capitalism and social. Because you,
I would agree as expressed in
order to have competition, I think you have to invest in people socially, in their potential as unique individuals, and when you do that, they compete naturally, because that's how human beings are. They naturally compete, but you don't have like just one large force stomping everybody, and that's what you want. You want competition, so you want to cater to people. A lot of people that they say they're communists. No, they're actually capitalists. You more cater to people socially. It would have them compete naturally and amongst each other, and that will go back. That investment that you do, there will be return on that investment that will go to the capitalist ideology of the strong individual. You have the strong person in competition come up with something that's good for society to buy, that'll benefit their lives. I think that it's a back and forth.
I'm gonna push back there for a second, Nivik, because you said that people in a capitalist system are incentivized to design things that are good for other people and benefit people's lives. That's actually not true.
No. I'm saying when you invest in people socially, you'd have them compete against each other.
I know that. I know.
And
what you
the
mean.
person, and so whoever's on top, they're going to have to come up with a better idea in order to stay relevant.
Right.
And so I'm just saying, it's like it's a back and forth. Interaction, and where you don't want a person to take out all the competition and enslave everybody. So they don't have no drive to innovate, and they don't have no means to necessarily pay you any more money.
Right, I 100% agree.
You're pretty much so that fucks up society.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just not. It's not good.
Do we genuinely here? Do we generally agree that the closer to a free market, the worse off it is? Or are you guys completely libertarian in your?
I'm not completely libertarian. I believe in I believe in some minor anti-monopoly and some minor trust busting stuff, because trusts are just monopolies that have outsourced themselves into other corporations. And I am maybe in favor of a little bit of protectionism from nation to nation, but that's about it. I'm pretty libertarian, but not all the way. What were you gonna say, Dal?
I don't agree. I think the freer the market, the better.
Yeah, I believe in a mixed economy. I just think that you can't start off as you have to start off as free a market as possible, and then identify things like polluting rivers that aren't being fixed by the current market system and updating them.
Right.
And then occasionally probably trimming that bush down from all the red tape as those problems get fixed by other solutions.
I mean, nature conservation.
I agree. And I just pay you with food. You'd be okay with that? You think that's a good thing?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. What was that?
If I have you as a worker slave and I just pay you food, that'd be a good thing.
What's slavery got to do with capitalism?
You're making profit from me. You're a worker, right? That's what. When you have an employer, they work. Slaves no different.
Am I a slave or an employee? Because that's not the same thing.
It is the same thing. You're having
Do you honestly think slaves are just employees?
All right, hold on. I'm gonna break in just for 1 second. Nivik, I want you to define slave and then define employee. If you're saying that they have the same definition, then it better be a damn good definition that fully encompasses both terms. So please use your definitions, because this argument is about definitions and those aren't helpful. So just establish them now, Nivik, and Mace can see if he even agrees with the definitions in the first place, then we can move forward. And then we'll get to Dan and Fierce.
Good idea.
But it could be a fight between a slave and an employee. Sometimes you can be an employee, right? And a person can be a slave, and the employer can say, hey, this slave, he's got free shelter, he's got food, and the crumbs they pay me, I can barely meet those ends. I'm saying there could be it's in a way it's hard. I'm just saying, they could be the same, is what I'm saying.
I think you're probably using it metaphorically.
I mean, they can be. I guess, Mace, the better question would be, okay, Mace, how would you delineate between slave and employee? What's the fundamental difference for you? To me, it feels like threat of force.
I am allowed to quit my job and go somewhere else, whereas if I'm a slave, I am owned by somebody, and I do not have the ability to leave at any point if I don't like it. I have, if I disobey my master, I die.
Right. So, yeah.
That could be the same for an employee.
Yeah. I'm more along the lines of
one that can feed
here. I think as an employee can be a slave, but there's a lot of overlap. I use a broader definition of the term slave to just mean you don't have autonomy in your choices. So in the context of the employment, some employees are slaves because they don't have any autonomy. They have to do what their boss says. They're doing
That's not true.
It's not chattel slavery because they still own themselves, but there's other employees that are almost entirely autonomous in their.
You didn't ask me how they can have freedom.
Yeah, sorry. There's other employees that are that have a degree of autonomy in how they how they accomplish their job and what they do in the day-to-day of their job, and even what the scope of their jobs are. Right. So there's a lot of employees that are almost fully autonomous. And there's a lot of them that are not autonomous.
If you're allowed to leave, then you're not a slave. Simple as
that.
that.
Hold on. So hold on. Nivik, hold on.
That aren't allowed to leave either, like sailors in the U.S. Navy.
I hate to break up this fun three-way, but I need to take a second here. The theme that I'm hearing is that some employees are basically so destitute and rely so much on their job for their basic needs that it's tantamount to slavery, because while they have a choice to leave, they don't really have a choice because they're not capable of existing without that job. Is that a proper understanding of what you're saying, Doolittle?
Well, no. Well, there's that, but also your autonomy in your employment, right? So if you're a factory worker and your job is to pull the little plastic piece off of the injection mold 100,000 times a day, 5 days a week, like there's no autonomy there. You're just doing what your boss told you. In that sense, you're a slave. So that's like the third definition of slave.
Yeah, I mean, you're stretching a little bit, but I see what you're saying.
Your job as an employee.
No, so I'm making a distinction between slavery in general and chattel slavery, which is where you don't actually own yourself and have the ability to sever yourself from an employment relationship.
There are slaves that did what they want regardless of being beaten or threatened.
Yeah, and there were slaves in the South that managed the plantations. They were they were like the middle managers of the plantations. So there's different kinds of slavery and there's different kinds of employment and there's a lot of overlap.
But the thing that characterizes all historical forms of slavery that I'm aware of that does not exist as far as all modern day employees in the Western world, as far as I'm aware, is threat of force, because that doesn't exist. That exists for slaves, whip, beat, kill.
If you're in the military, you would know otherwise.
If you're in the military and you don't like working there are ways you can leave. You can buy yourself out. Obviously, you can't just walk out on the day. You have to sign forms and go through the correct procedure, but you're not owned by them and they can't keep you the rest of your life.
Thing is free will.
Okay. Dan, I was going to get to you and Fierce just now, so I guess that's good timing. Breaking in with the there's no such thing as free will argument, please elaborate. How does that relate to what we're talking about as far as autonomy among employees? And how does it relate to your take on capitalism writ large? Please, I want to hear it.
Oh, okay, that's a big one. Is it okay if I get 2 minutes or just
Oh no, you take all the time you want, man. This is the first controversy of the entire time. So I would love for you to throw a couple of haymakers. Should be fun.
So I think there's definitely a worthwhile distinction between the way in which we speak about slavery as ownership of a person and the way in which many people who are more on the left talk about wage slavery. An interesting thing that you said, John, that I do agree with is the idea of slavery is kind of backed up by force when you don't do what needs to be done. The idea is that the system as a whole punishes you, incarcerates you with the use of force when you're not either an owner of property and pay wages, or if you're the person who has to get a living wage and work hourly. If you don't do that, the only other possibility is some type of force within the system. Most laws are there to protect property. Most laws only enforce and protect people who do have money. You look at homeless people or people in poverty, this is a clear example. When it comes to capitalism, I think that capitalism shouldn't be synonymous with free markets. And a free market can definitely exist within a democratic socialist system or within even many other economic models. The idea is it's more, I think we usually speak about planned economy versus a free market. And in many different conceptions of free market can absolutely exist within socialist frameworks. I think the critiques of capitalism are solid and fair, and critiques of planned economies are obvious and fair as well. And I think a marriage between the two, in which people still have personal property, but within corporations, once they reach a certain size, making it that there are laws that force the corporations to recognize put the corporation as a part of their property. And for me, this is just an extension on property rights by John Locke. That when you put work into the land, if you put work into the products, it becomes a part of you. And in a sense, that's your property. And I think the US is founded on this idea. And I think with really large businesses, the fact that we ignore property rights and how property rights work on a metaphysical way, as Locke explained them, I think it is a denial of humanity and humans' property itself.
If I could ask a question real quick, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I just want to ask a question. Do laborers getting paid for their labor and for the product of your labor, like they said, like in exchange for the stuff they produce, not recognize a property right? Because it's not like they're being forced to create it and being given nothing. They're being said, hey, create this property of yours and and create it for us, and we'll give you money in exchange. Does that not satisfy that right to your mind? And if so, why not? And what would you do instead?
A big thing is if I work for someone, for a company, and they're like, hey, can you create this logo or whatever? And I go ahead and make it. And it ends up being that logo has given the company $100,000 that year. And I only get paid, I don't know, $15 an hour. I make like $40,000 or whatever it might be. And I don't see a raise from this profit. I don't see a share in this profit. What we are assuming is that it's not exploitative for you to rent my time and then exploit that on something that in a Lockean sense, is a part of my property.
But did you not agree to that?
Huh?
But did you not agree to that theoretically? In whatever the contract.
Yeah, but I said it's.
You willingly disposed of that property at the time of making it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree that you're disposing of that property. I think it's exploitative.
Okay.
I think with the way you describe capitalism, I think that's almost exactly how I was trying to say it, but just much more eloquent. So thanks for
no problem.
putting it that way. I wanted to add that I think that this might be controversial. I don't think companies should be allowed to own intellectual property.
Yeah, I mean, that's
okay.
That's a serious point of debate. That's interesting, especially I think because of the way laws are written around intellectual property. It doesn't make it a thing that it treats it as if it's like a physical materials object that you own. And due to that, it becomes very messy legally, which is why I think we're generally against it. But I would have no issue that if
I think it solves the exploitation. Like I invented a way, solve some engineering problem.
Okay.
And I'm the only person that ever could solve this. 1,000 engineers that came before me tried and failed. I solved the engineering problem. The company makes $10 million. I get a $1,000 bonus 1 year, and then the next year they fire me, and they keep making $2 million a year for the rest of my life off of solving that engineering problem, right? So a lot of people would think that's exploitative, right?
I think so. I would think it is.
And if the company's not actually a person, right?
Correct.
Like we treat them as a legal entity, but they don't really have agency like humans do. So I think if they're not allowed to own intellectual property, then they can't just exploit. Make this solve this problem for me, and I'll make $1 trillion off of it, and then we'll send you packing.
I mean,
as long as you're an employee there, they have a fair contract would be like, as long as you're an employee there. They get unlimited license to use the intellectual property that you create.
Can I just clarify? Are you saying that only company... Sorry, no, let me rephrase that. Are you saying that intellectual property should be something that only individual people can have? Or are you saying...
I think that's an idea that I think is worth exploring. Yeah.
Okay. There is a difference between personal property and private property. Right? That is a big difference that we should recognize. For example, if I rent houses to someone, if I own an apartment building, it's not my personal property. Other people have rights to it. They have laws associated with it. Right? I can't just kick them out. There's tenants laws, etc. But it is my private property. That's the difference. It means that I have full say and control over that item or asset, as we speak about.
It's a great discussion, guys, but we have a couple people I've been neglecting, unfortunately.
Yeah, go.
They should have turned on their face cams if they wanted to get in quicker, but alas. Fierce, you were here first, and then we'll go to Saturnus. Saturnus, I have only interacted with you over text, so it will be it should be fun to do voice. But first, Fierce, who I've never seen before, please, we've been talking for a bit about property rights, about capitalism. What do you think? You a fan? Do you have any things you would like to improve? How would you define it? Just go right ahead if you got something to say.
I'm not sure I really know exactly what you guys are talking about specifically, but I would say that, I guess in general, something I thought about recently with the whole the whole wage slave stuff is it's like we wouldn't live in the world that we live in now if it wasn't built off of slave labor like it was, because they were prioritizing some future state at essentially the suffering of other people. And you could argue that that suffering still exists today, but in lesser quantities, in different forms. And there will always be some form of suffering until we live in what would be a post-scarcity world. Because there's always going to be stuff that we're competing for in a capitalist society, whether it's you could say that we're post-scarcity for things like shelter or food. If I chose to, I could probably retire and then just live the bare minimum life, but I'm not going to have a relationship. I'm not going to have influence on the future of the world. I'm not going to be able to travel, all of these things that not everyone has access to directly. And so people that do live in those, like Elon Musk, for example, basically like people in his position make the decision of, how much are we, how much are we willing to let people suffer to prioritize the future of the world to get to Mars or something like that. Obviously, that's a very over exaggeration of it, but I would say that there's a certain level of suffering that we go through as a society, or is inflicted upon the lower hierarchical structure of society to make the future better.
Can I say one thing? But other people doing good made the future better. No.
Yeah, I think that's right, and
they can contribute.
Yeah, and I'm going to defer to Dan to check my history on this. But last time I checked, your point on slavery is interesting. It made me raise my eyebrows a little bit. But if my American history is right, part of the reason why the agricultural South could not beat the North is because it had economically stagnated, because it kept holding on to slavery. And the only reason slavery lasted so long is because the cotton gin happened to come around and kept it alive. It seems that it seems like slavery was never a better economic system than more free capitalism. Dan, am I right on the economics of that, or am I off base?
Yeah, a big reason why the South had financial issues is, one, they needed backing from England, which they didn't get,
and they're agricultural
in other countries, and then at the same time they couldn't because they had so much the population that was contributing into the economy kept growing, didn't grow as slave labor grew, and because of that, what you end up having is an economy that can't function during times of war. And that's because it was very difficult for them financially.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to Saturnus here, just because I haven't heard from him yet. Saturnus, what do you think about all this? You can respond to what we've been saying specifically, or just in general capitalism, what you think, how you define it, if you have a better idea, all that good stuff.
Hey, John, it's nice to have you, for you to have me on here like this.
Of course,
Thank you. It's a complicated subject. I think there's capitalism in its most principal abstract definition, and then there's capitalism then there's like different material manifestations or material states to what capitalism can be. So like the term crony capitalism refers to big business, regulatory capture, big business being hand in hand with the government, shifting and lobbying and changing the nature of things so it pushes smaller business out. That's actually seems to be happening with the marijuana industry, happening in California and maybe other places, I don't know. But in California, taxes are being raised really prohibitively, and there's all sorts of other stuff, and it's sort of becoming a situation where only big business can inhabit the market, So like that's just a little tangent there. But what is capitalism? I guess in principle, well, I guess the libertarian definition of it. Let me see if I can recall it really quick. Capitalism is when there's there's a number of definitions to it, but capitalism is when there's like free exchange between individuals and a recognition of property rights. So there that capitalism emerges from that. So there's many different angles to it, but I guess my main problem with it really kind of comes from whether or not the employee or people involved in a negotiation have equal bargaining power, and I think people like socialists talk about exploitation, but it can be kind of an abstract term. Like, what does exploitation actually mean? And so for me, I think exploitation is when a person agrees to something that they wouldn't have agreed to if both parties had equal negotiating power. And that can really kind of play a factor in employee relations. A lot of people can, get overburdened or can be overburdened or, in their job. That happens in the tech industry, or, these are kind of like little, they'll do the job of 3 people or something, because they lay off a few and whatnot. And, there are situations that just wouldn't happen. That just wouldn't happen if, the company needed them as much as, they needed, there was equal kind of thing going on there. And so that kind of got me interested in collective bargaining.
Unions, yeah.
So I think having collective bargaining power is important within capitalism when it comes to workers and laborers especially. And that if there isn't that, then you're going to get issues. Then you're going to get people saying, "Oh my God, wage slavery is happening." But even with wage slavery, like in California, it can be from different angles. It's not wage slavery isn't necessarily just your boss exploiting you. Wage slavery is the result of terrible housing prices in zoning laws in California. Okay, we're zoning everything for single family homes when it should be duplexes, quadplexes, apartment complex and stuff. And we've been doing that for so long that now the population is kind of outgrowing the supply.
So
low supply, high demand, housing prices are skyrocketing. That's being taken out of your wages. Then there's also healthcare issues. So I don't know. That's kind of all I have to say at the moment, about it. Those are just my thoughts about it. It's a little bit. It's important to understand it abstractly, but then you need to talk about the specific capitalisms, and
in a way,
what a specific situation.
What a capitalist system after a while kind of produces, and how is it currently? How is it looking right now? What is it looking right now because of the system we have in place?
And compare them. Maybe there's some other capitalist systems that are doing better off. People are happier than others. Why is that? And that's why it's also important to just kind of not be deontological about it, because some libertarians can be really deontological. All that matters, the non-aggression principle and government regulation is aggression, or something like that. So you got to look at the consequences in the material. You can't just look purely at principle.
Right. You mentioned a couple of interesting things I really do want to touch on. Number one being private unionization. We hear a lot in the news about like public unions, and I personally think public unions are pretty bad because you're bargaining against the taxpayer, which like isn't epic since you're a government employee. But we don't hear much about private unions. Yeah, and like I would like a lot more of those. And when I tell this to my more my more collectivist friends, they know like I'm a decent fan of capitalism. I say this and
wait, hold on. What do you want more of?
More private unions, more negotiation. I want private unions to consolidate more. Yeah. And like, you know, I'm not in favor of like kneecapping and all that stuff. Like blind ballots would be great, but I think more government protections of the right to unionize and make sure corporations aren't like, you know, like blackballing anybody or anything like that. I think that could be really good because that is where the bargaining power is supposed to come from, like you were talking about. And another piece of bargaining power, and I forget who mentioned this, saying Nivik, saying like, yeah, force doesn't exist from your boss, like threatening to punch you in the face, but you actually can't not participate in the system. Because if you're not an employee and you're not a capital owner, then it means you're on the street and that's illegal and you'll go to jail. So in my perfect fantasy land, we would have like a tract of land that's just like state of nature in the Hobbesian sense. And it's like, okay, you don't like the capitalist system, you don't like working for like $7 an hour, cool. Go over here and live how it like. It'd be nice if we had that option for no reason other than I can stand on that and say, hey, you don't have to participate if you don't want to. Have fun. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist, so I can't stand on that. Nobody would choose it if it existed, except for like huntsmen who don't really need to. But
you know, there's a comment
basically providing space for terrorists to live
yes.
by the law.
Look, I said it was my fantasy land. I never said it was a good idea. I said it was an ideologically consistent idea.
UN recognizes the fact. I know currently the current UN recognizes the fact that having a citizenship and having a country, they consider it a positive human right, necessary to even have your negative freedoms. So
that's not even that's so backwards from like the initial philosophical like origin of what negative freedoms are. That's so strange. The UN is so weird, man. I don't know.
I think it makes sense personally, but
well, I agree that like countries are necessary for things that people regard as positive rights, but the whole idea of
they're necessary to even have negative rights.
No, but that doesn't make sense because like the entire idea of negative rights is that you have them inherently and they pre-exist government. Like that's the point.
No, it's not. No, but anytime you have the ability to exercise and not have a tyranny on top of you, right? Like one of the biggest points of Hobbes and both Rousseau, they both agree on this. Is the only way to escape the state of nature is to give up some of your negative rights for positive rights.
Right, but you're giving some up, and that's the point.
No,
right?
that's exactly the point. Is that it's being a part of a community and a part of a country where you can give up some of your negative rights is already it's necessary in order to exercise those negative rights, because without that, you're stuck in the state of nature. You're stuck in a state of war. Both Hobbes and Rousseau agree on this. And the only way to exit that state of war, to not be in tyranny, is to give up some of your negative rights.
Right, and I agree that it's better to give up a small amount of your negative rights in order to enter a society where you have positive rights and a lot more freedom and you're not constantly scared. But the contention that giving up some of your negative rights is the only thing that allows you to exercise your negative rights again seems kind of weird to me. I've read Hobbes and I've read Rousseau.
That's the philosophical argument from both Rousseau and Hobbes.
Yeah, I guess I didn't understand them well enough then. I don't know. I should go back to my reading. But I don't know. That didn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. But fair enough. What was your general point? And then we'll go to Zemo.
That's it. I just wanted to just talk, because we talked about a land where you couldn't have a country, and but I think that is like evil to do to people, because then it's not like a free space.
Well, I'm not forcing anyone into it. I'm just saying.
Oh,
like,
no, I'm just saying.
Never
mind. Don't worry about it. Never mind.
I just want to be clear. I'm not shipping people, like homeless people, off to like the shadow realm. Like, I'm not. That's not my idea. I'm just saying that exists. If you don't want to participate in capitalism, that's fine. We're not going to force you. Because Nivik made a good point that if you don't participate, you basically go to jail. So having an alternative would be more ideologically consistent. But again, fair enough. Zemo, hopped in at a very interesting time. We're talking about capitalism at large. We're talking about how it's best defined, how it can be improved, if it's moral at all. I want to get your take on the matter, and then I think I have some ideas of where I want to take this conversation next. Oh, actually, you know what, Concept Hut, you're next. I'm sorry I skipped you. You'll go next. Zemo?
I just got here. I probably am not next.
All right, well, Zemo, if you got anything, if you want hot takes, go ahead. If not, I have some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally just got in here. I mean, you know, is capitalism moral? I mean, is any system moral? You know, I mean, I think it's the worst system compared to all the other systems we have. I'm sure socialism will come up. Now, I guess one question I would have is, if you have a largely free market society and then you have a decent welfare state underneath that, does that make it socialist? Because if it is, then I'm for that. But when you start talking about like literal redistributions of wealth, which, you know, you could call it the welfare state program, but I think there's a distinction there. That's the big question for me, because, you know, like Nivik, like, I don't know, you said something about Nivik saying, you know, capitalism, I mean, a life essentially forces you it forces you into a game, like Squid Games. Like, you know, if you don't do anything, you're doomed either way. So you're going to have to do something. You might as well make something that's mutually beneficial for all parties. And then, you know, you get into exploitation, and that's what I think capitalism does. It actually harnesses our own self-interest, kind of goes with human nature, our tendency to be selfish, our tendency to do things, say, oh, well, I could, you know, I'm a good drawer, blah, blah, blah. I also want a big house so I can draw, sell it to people, and then they have their things and they do it, you know, back to us, their skills and goods and what have you. But that would be the question, like I said before, is a capitalist free society with a large social safety net, with, you know, that's not crazy, giving crazy incentives. Is that a, you know, a socialist country? If so, you know, it is. If not, then, you know, whatever too. But that's kind of what I have in mind. But at capitalism, I'm generally a fan. But I just don't understand people who are like socialists or communists. Like, why can't there just be a reformed capitalism?
Can I say one thing?
Party, opposed to anything else?
Saturnus was first, and then we'll go to you, Nivik.
Well, I mean, we need to be on the same page about terms, you know.
Yes.
According to
Saturnus
how do I put it? According to I think I've read into Marxism a bit, and the core idea of socialism, to my understanding, I'll put it that way. In my understanding, socialism, it's a word that's misused a lot. It's a word that's propagandized a lot. Okay, like for instance, like
thank you.
There are people that may criticize adding, you know, state-funded, you know, state-helped childcare as socialism or something. Like, they use words like rhetorically, so it's important to be clear on that. Socialism means state social. There's many different kinds of socialism, but state socialism means, at least in theory, this is kind of what Marxism is about. I'll define two. It means state ownership of the means of production, with hopefully the end point of representing the worker's interests, or giving the worker the means of production. And then there's what's the other word? You could say then there's democratic socialism or libertarian socialism, where, you know, you have minimal government, or there is government there, but the workers own the means of production.
See, that makes not a lot. That one doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We can talk about that one later, but libertarian socialism always seems strange to me, because it feels to me that, like, eventually if the workers own the means of production, right, and then they realize some workers are better at labor and some workers are better at managing, and they just rearrange themselves because it creates a more efficient structure, all of a sudden you're back to a hierarchical state, and then you need some sort of strong government to put that down again, wouldn't they?
But, well, Did you say it? Wait. What was the last part? You said a strong government could put that down again?
Well, right, because like if you have what we have right
Yeah.
now, we have businesses who don't really want to democratize. Some businesses democratize voluntarily, by the way. Tons of local businesses do. But as far as businesses who just don't want to, you would need some sort of strong centralized body like a government to force them to
Yeah.
democratize. And if any businesses did step out of line, you'd have to have that government in there to force them to democratize again, which makes me feel like
Well, that
that feels
that
like
idea makes that idea makes the libertarians scream.
okay, fair enough. We're on the same page then. Cool.
But when John says businesses don't want to democratize, who's he talking about? Like, who in the business? Like the bosses, the leaders? Yeah, obviously not.
Well, even some of the employees, because a lot of like, look, a cash teller at a supermarket doesn't know how to run like Safeway. He wouldn't want to be in the position where he can like do something like that because it's not his job. He doesn't know how. Honest to God, if you took most of the employees and tried to have them run their own companies, they'd run the companies into the ground because people have different expertise.
What's your evidence for that,
It's
though?
important.
I mean, that's a plan.
Basic understanding of human
That's
nature.
right? Like I just got a job at Ace Hardware. Like, what the fuck am I gonna tell my boss about Ace Hardware?
1 second.
Like, seriously,
Right, but
This
this
is exactly the same argument the kings and queens made when people were talking about democracy. Now, when we look at democracy, does the private individual have the same power and equal power to run the government, to run political office? No. Those are people who are usually elected. There's certain parameters to electability, which you can test through meritocracy through the academic sector, and all of these things can work together, like any other system, where it's not just the guy who's stacking the bookshelves at Ace is going to be running the finance, but the 5 guys who stack the bookshelves at Ace can have some input into the policy, what it means to stack, what is the better ways to organize a store, things like that they will have more expertise in doing as a group.
Why do you
That's what
assume
it
that they
means.
don't have input in the first
But
place?
I think the whole point with that, though, is that no matter what, like you said, if there's companies where the boss is going to push back on that, say if I come in, I've been working there for whatever, there's a guy that's been working there for 20 years. There's another guy that's about to go off to college in 2 weeks. Like, how are we going to make this work exactly? And that's for this one store. Then we got to do it chain by chain. Of course, there's going to be chain. It just seems like it seems like a totally unfeasible thing to do, especially how deeply. Now, if we were a Spartan office society, but it seems totally
You almost
unfeasible.
never get a boss who allows like his business to become democratized. You know, it wouldn't be profitable for him. Like worker co-ops. Like the ones that are not started from the ground up by the workers themselves are usually like, bosses who are like too old and you know, they don't have like kids to give it to or who want it. So, you know, they give it to the workers because just, you know, they got to go. They're too old. They want to retire.
I think it's also important to recognize that most...
Dan,
John, I wanted to interject something. To respond to your point about democracy, I think it's important to recognize that there's different types of democratization. There's direct democratization. There's flattening the hierarchy completely, and then there's democratically constructing a hierarchy for efficiency's sake. So you can turn in a socialism where there's social ownership of the means of production, where, like worker cooperatives or whatever, a worker cooperative can still have a hierarchy. It's just democratically constructed hierarchy, and there's a little bit more equal bargaining power happening within that hierarchy than just in a traditional capitalism where it's a little bit more oligarchic. It's a little bit more like run by a special group of people.
I mean, not a little bit, like it is.
Okay, so I have 2 points on that.
What do you think about that, John?
Yes.
What do you think about
I have 2 points on that, and I'm going to make them, and then I'm going to be really mean and not allow you to respond because I want to get to villain. But I think I'll be pretty fair. So then this is just my thinking. I'm not saying I'm right. I mean, obviously I think this, so I think I'm right, but you get the point. One, I don't know why we think that this is, you mentioned this third type of democratization, which is like a democratized hierarchy where everybody kind of gets a say. My feeling is that we kind of already to an extent, like, that's what we have, right? Because people at the bottom, if they don't like how the company's being run, they won't work there if there's proper competition. And two, they could unionize and make demands. So I feel like they already have bargaining power. The lower downs already have the means to make influence in the upper echelons, and they can do that by simply voting with their feet, or voting through union organization. And while we don't have enough of that, and I would love more private unions, I think we already have that. And you also run into the problem is that I don't think that there's actually a literal better way of creating an efficient hierarchy to run a business than I think that everybody in the business getting together and voting people in is going to create a less efficient and less productive structure than what the
What's
market
your
already
argument
does.
for that? Do you have a
What's the evidence? Yeah, what's the evidence?
Because I think that the market naturally calculates for people being better at their job than a whole bunch of people in a room who simply think people are better at their job.
Well, I mean,
and I think that
but those are baseless claims. But
I'm
yeah,
about
I don't think you'd be
to
interested in going
base
through
them.
the evidence surrounding this issue because it's not going to be on your side.
I'm about to base them.
And yeah, we can fucking pull it out right now if you want.
I mean,
guys, whoa, let's
hold
lower the aggression.
on.
Right?
Let's
lower the aggression.
calm down. If you hey, moderator time. Pax, if you have evidence to the contrary, please put it in a live text. I'd love to take a look at it and be corrected.
Yeah,
I'm just saying
I
what I
got something
think.
more to offer than I feel this is the case.
I mean, Saturnus, Pax,
your
knock it
argument?
off.
I want to hear it.
Pax, Zemo, knock it off. Saturnus asked me what I thought, and I'm telling him what I
Man,
think.
fuck you! Don't tell me shit, nigga.
I'd like to
Zemo, that is not nice. Okay.
I don't give a fuck about not.
Yeah, that wasn't nice, Zemo.
Behave yourselves.
Yeah.
No.
Pax, anyway, my initial point was that businesses are going to want to turn themselves, are most likely going to turn themselves into hierarchy at some point because humans generally do arrange themselves into hierarchies. And when that happens, if it happens to too much of an extent, or if we want to democratize businesses that exist right now that are hierarchical, you're going to need some sort of strong government to force that to happen. Therefore, making the idea of a libertarian socialist state kind of like null, because hierarchies are going to naturally emerge and are going to need to be continually flattened a little bit.
There's a difference between what you're saying and what other people are saying. It's not about that hierarchies will or will not exist. It's about how they come to exist, how they are enforced to exist.
Amen.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but again, I don't see that much of a distinction between a hierarchy that everybody votes on with ballots and a hierarchy that everybody votes on with their dollar and with unionization. I don't see much of a difference other than slightly higher stakes, really.
Do you think of the voting process is gives people more of the ability to self-determine and make changes in their life, or do you think how they spend their money is where they can exercise the most fair choice?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you.
I will definitely argue that with their money, especially in their current system, this doesn't make any sense.
Can I tell you why? Because I know why.
Please.
Why?
And then we'll go to Villain, who I've been meaning to get to the whole time.
Are you familiar with the prisoner's dilemma?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so
for anybody watching,
a little bit for everybody else.
Yeah.
Prisoner's dilemma is basically two prisoners are in their own individual cells, and somebody comes to each of them with a deal and says, "Hey, if you turn yourself, if you turn this other guy in, if you snitch on him, then I'll give you this deal." And so, because everybody is going to largely act on selfish desires, they're going to try to get the best deal, and knowing that they can't trust the other people to do what they may do, they're going to just act in as much control as they will. I mean, as they know they can, which is snitching on the other person. So because of this, you end up with both people losing out, because they could have got, both lesser sentences, but instead one got a less sentence, a less sentence, and the other one got a huge sentence. So similarly, when it comes to this idea of bargaining power, in terms of like, I won't buy this thing, if everybody else doesn't also buy this thing from these people, then we can like force these people to like, do something good. That's not going to happen for the same exact reason. You can't trust these people to do so. And oftentimes, you sort of need that service for various reasons. You're constrained by maybe time or money. So you don't have the same bargaining power or coherence or resolve as the corporation does that you're trying to affect.
You individually, absolutely. And there is absolutely a collective action problem that is very hard for all people to get on board with. So I think that's true. But Villain, I've been wanting to get to you for a while.
You're not a people, you're not going to get it to work.
Unless you get enough people, yeah, that's right. Unless you get enough people or to spend with their dollar, basically enough votes on your side, yeah, you're not going to win. Villain, what do you think about capitalism, this whole shebang? You've been listening. I haven't been the most popular fella for the last 10 minutes. I'm curious what you think. I'm expecting you're going to come down with me if I know anything about you. So I'm kind of unleashing the hounds here. So please. Villain going once. Villain going twice. Your mute is off, but I can't hear you.
Maybe exit and rejoin.
Yeah, exit and rejoin, Villain. I was like saying release the Kraken, and then like nothing happened. It was very anticlimactic.
Here.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
Yes. Excellent.
All right. Can you narrow that very big open-ended question you gave me?
Absolutely not. No. Yes, I can. We were talking about capitalism writ large and whether it's good or not. Primarily, we were talking about the differences between like a democratized workplace, like a la Libertarian Socialism, where everybody gets together and basically votes on the structure, as opposed to a business model where everybody votes via union negotiations, dollars spent, and choosing to work there or not, and whether those are the same thing, which one has more power, if one's exploitative and one isn't, and just basically those two different ways of structuring a business and an economy, how those stack up to each other. That was the debate I saw in my mind. So I'd love to get your take on that, or just capitalism at large. Anything?
I don't know. And the first thing that I think about, like, I don't know. The first thing I thought about is when I was 24, I created my own construction company. It was just a small little owner operator, and at one point I had like 5 guys under me, and it was just construction company. But most of the guys that worked for me they're good workers. I enjoyed having them, but they weren't smart. As long as I told them exactly what to do, they could do it, and it was profitable for me. But there was no problem solving capabilities for some of them, and I just think about that. Like, how would my construction company have worked democratically? Like, I just don't. It seems silly.
All right, Villain thinks it seems silly. Pax put something in live chat talking about how worker co-ops are generally more resilient than conventional businesses, which is interesting. I'll have to dig into that a little bit more. So I guess the next question is it actually moral?
A lot of times worker co-ops...
Yeah, the first one has like a bibliography too, like the first source, so it's like several.
So I guess the next question would be, is it moral to force businesses to run this way? Basically, is it moral?
Yeah, I think it's moral in the same way you can force people to not be able to sell themselves the property for money either. Just no, you can't do that anymore. Next.
Wait, so are you?
I mean, the
actually,
thing is,
hold on.
To be fair to this conversation, since it's like capitalism versus socialism, I mean, worker cooperatives doesn't mean socialism.
Agreed.
You have obviously worker cooperatives in a capitalist system. like yeah, if you got a bunch of workers, right, who collectively own and run their own fucking company, I mean, that could be considered their own private property, right?
Correct.
I mean,
the socialist part is if you force every business to run that way. Dande made an interesting point. So you said that it is moral to force people not to sell. Like, repeat that statement again, because I think it has implications for like prostitution law, funnily enough, and your position on that.
To sell them as property. People, it's immoral to allow people to sell themselves as property.
Well, they're not selling themselves; they're selling their labor.
I was thinking about this the other day. Why is that illegal? If you have if you're think about this. If you're a capitalist, you're a free market. Like you're Friedman over here, right? Milton Friedman.
I mean,
what's wrong with that? That's a service. You're a good or a service. I mean, who is the government to fucking tell you that? I'm not personally.
Like,
I'm not
you are
personally.
now
Hold on,
mine
let me finish. Hold on.
hereafter.
I'm not personally for it, but I'm saying, what's the argument against it? Because it seems like if anything would ever be my property, my private parts would be my property.
Do we have any responses to that? I have some ideas, but I bet other people do too.
I mean, my response is that we're not talking about selling your time or an act or a service. We're talking about selling yourself as property. Like, oh yeah, give this woman this much money, and now I will be yours.
Are
Like,
you
own me?
Are you equating that to business
we
models
have that,
that
though?
don't
Like,
run
as-
democratically? Is the same thing as like actually selling
Oh no,
yourself in that way?
I'm saying why not? Why can't we pass the law? I'm not saying we should or shouldn't.
Oh, that's
There's
actually
nothing-
good. That's a great question.
There's nothing that makes it weird to pass such a law. It's not outside the scope of any government, even our current government.
Snark.
Just say no, you can't do that anymore.
Snark, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Should freedom of contract involve you being allowed to sell your literal self into service, like similar to slavery, like indentured servitude, basically? Do you think that should be allowed, Snark? Completely on the spot. Nice to see you, by the way. Thanks for dropping in.
Good to see you too, man. That is quite a question.
Oh yeah.
I'm really not. Yeah, I'm not sure I could give you an answer without thinking about it, bro.
All
Sorry.
Right. Okay, well, fair enough, man. I didn't know really what I was expecting. Does anybody else
I
have an
didn't
answer
think
to
about
that?
that.
I don't know either. The capitalist side of me is like, yes, that's fine, rights wise, but the like morality side of me is like, no. So the capitalists and the morality don't always go together.
Is there any way for like that for the legality of that to be exploited from the business side? Is it possible for businesses to create situations in which people like would have to sell themselves through indentured servitude, like in order to survive, in order to exist, in order to and so on? So from a right side, you could be like libertarian about it. Like from a principled perspective, the government shouldn't be taking my negative liberties away. But at the same time, maybe the government making that illegal is a protection. I don't know. Might be an idea.
Yeah, I mean the military kind of does it, don't they? Like a little bit. Like that's kind of the same idea, right?
Oh, I hear.
Yeah, so like a little. That's kind of part of the deal. Is you're kind of selling yourself to them for like a bit. But you're not allowed to do it with private companies. That's really strange. Because you could envision situations where you stop getting paid hourly, and you're like, look, you guys owe me for 3 years. I'll do whatever you want as long as you feed me and clothe me and keep me and my family like healthy as far as basic needs go. And then at the end, after that, you pay me like $200,000 or something like that, and then we're done. Like you could see like contracts like that starting to emerge. Which would be.
I mean, yeah, but you can think about that in like, okay, my cost for living this year, this much money. My cost for feeding my kids is this. I'll work on the movie set for this amount of money for these years. This is my salary. It's the same thing.
Right. But you can also see situations in which it's just like actual indentured servitude. Which like what we had
and
historic.
That's the distinction, right?
Yeah.
That's the distinction between owning someone as property versus someone selling their time or their skill
Right, but theoretically, if you're selling your time, you're selling like all of your time. And if you're selling the company the rights to use all of your time as you see fit, and after you sign the contract, you can't refuse. I don't see much of a distinction between that and just like selling
Well,
yourself.
we have
The
worker
distinction there is that what you're saying there is closer to a leasehold agreement. You're not actually selling yourself; you're leasing yourself.
Okay, you're renting yourself out. Great.
But
That's
no, but
great.
then there's certain laws around it, right? It's not just
Yeah.
it's not private property, right? There's laws. For example, you can't work me more than these many hours in a row. I am liable for
That's
at
kinda
least
bullshit,
this many hours of
not gonna lie.
vacation, right? These are specific laws that we have. So
Do we have any other takes on this one from the room? I'd love to hear
I
them.
want to. Yeah, well, Dan didn't just mention vacation time, and I just want to point out like how poor it is in the United States, and I'm sure people from overseas know. Like in France, well, this is like best case scenario, but like in France, you get, no matter your job, you get like 6 weeks of vacation time. And a lot of other places, like 2 weeks paid vacation time. If you get less than that in other countries, you get 2 weeks. Here, it's totally job dependent. I mean, a lot of jobs in America, you can't even get maternity leave. You know, if you're a pregnant woman, you know, or a pregnant man, you know, let's be inclusive. But yeah, it's abysmal, right? So, especially in such a well-off nation. That's why I asked the original question: is a pretty much free market capitalist society with strong social safety net underpinnings, is that a socialist, what do you want to call that? And whatever that is, I think I'm mostly in favor for it, as long as we don't have frivolous government spending.
I just want a correction real quick. You might not have paid maternity leave, but maternity leave, 3 months of maternity leave is federal law in the U.S.
Okay, villain.
Yeah, there's
I
also
never got
yeah.
I never got to respond to villain's testimony.
I mean, testimony's making things a little bit official, but yeah, go ahead, man.
Yes, his filed in triplicate, lost in the bureaucratic process, and then found again testimony.
Yeah, if he contradicts himself, I'll impeach him. It's fine.
Yeah, impeach him. So about that construction company, wouldn't it have been possible for you to just make a case to your workers that you were the most capable person there to, you know, efficiently run the company, and just do a few things, like do a few small or big things to demonstrate that? Like, you could talk to them about business concepts, and if it lost them, you could say, well, since you don't understand that, and I do, I'm the best person to do this administrative, to lead the company. Okay,
What benefit do I have by offering them that? Like, I already
Wait, say that again?
Like, how does that benefit me to put that on the table? It was already my company. Like, I'm going to run it. I think I'm the best. And like, what incentive would I have to allow them to vote me out?
No, I mean, that's a whole nother story. I'm just saying that people might not be as like dumb as you quite think. Like, you know, you could, in a situation where we're democratically constructing a hierarchy, people like you can go make a case for themselves amongst people who aren't like you, to say, hey, you know, I have more expertise in this, I have more of this and that, so I have the ability, I have the most ability here. You can do that. It's not like, oh, you know, if you have a democratic workplace and there's a bunch of people that don't know how to run it, it's just going to fail. Like, no, people have, unless if you're dealing with exceptionally stupid people. I mean, I'm just saying, like, yeah.
And it's my company. Like, I think I run my company the best. If I thought that somebody else was going to run it the best, I would have them run it, because it would profit me better.
I think we're switching to a different question now. It went from saying that, it went from introducing the possibility to make a case for skill differentials and putting yourself at the top of the hierarchy due to that.
Pointing out,
and now you're asking me.
I'm pointing out that what you're saying is null and void. Like it's just like talking about how many angels fit on the head of a pencil. Like it doesn't matter. Like I already, like, if I have the power, like I'm a dictator at my company. If I dictate it, why would I want to try to convince people that I'm the best for it? If I'm already the dictator.
No, we're talking about a situation where, like, let's say you were running it, but it was democratic, and like you're working with people that like they're construction workers, like they don't know how to run the company. It's not like, oh well, that's just gonna fail. Like, no, you can make the case to them, and then you would still be able to run the company efficiently.
Right.
What's this?
That's it. I'm not. Like that's all I'm
hold
saying.
on, one at a time. Let
people,
Villain respond.
People don't make this appeal to.
Let Villain
This
respond.
is just a motivating strategy at this point. This is just motivation. This is not democratically organized.
There's a
motivation for what? What are you talking about?
I said this. What you're saying is just like sounds like a pep talk, like a motivational speech he's going to give to his employees. I don't have to see what it has to do with hierarchy.
No, he's talking about a different power dynamic. He's saying that instead of just dictating what's best to his employees, he has to convince them. The power dynamic.
We were just talking to Villain about how Villain has to make a case to his employees about why he runs the company the best, basically talk them like he was talking about how they were stupid. And like you were basically saying, oh, talk to them about how they can run it better. That's a pep talk. That's like, hey man, here's this and that, right?
No, I'm saying talk to them about how he could run it better in that current situation, because in that situation he described, obviously he was the most fit person to like lead the work, because he knew the ins and outs of running the business, and other people didn't quite do that. But I just don't think I think people have enough common sense to like. I mean, you might get fringe cases where this doesn't happen, but I think there'll be many cases in a workers' co-op where people will have enough common sense to recognize, hey, actually running a business is pretty complicated, and we need somebody here that can do that, and they're not going to just like act like a bunch of monkeys and just like duct tape everything together, and then it all comes crashing down because no one knows like what the hell they're doing about anything. I don't think that's like the inevitable conclusion of any workers co-op.
I want to add to also, it's not like majority rule 51%. That's who runs the business, right? Democracies all over the world have many different branches. There's bicameral. There's different committees and different groups and purport. Like it doesn't mean just because the workers in the mailroom decided to gang up and overthrow the leader by swinging the vote to 51%, they don't have that power. We have to recognize democratic systems are systems, like they're just like any other systems. Just like businesses have a system where CFO has more power, who on the board has more power, right? It's not ubiquitous within every corporation.
So this raises a different issue that I want to talk about. It's actually been developing the live text, so I wanted to bring it into the voice chat before we close out here, because my time is unfortunately, as always, limited. For people watching, if you want to be a part of these discussions, please, the Discord link is in the description. Hop in and join us if you want to see the live text. But part of the live text is basically whether people, like lower down workers, actually have the right to have such a vote. And essentially, this is a point made by John Boy. And you can actually, John Boy, if you just want to make it, please do. It's about the differing degrees of risk, and therefore it kind of has to do with entitlement.
I'll summarize it a bit. So I like the idea of worker co-ops. I think, and I'll read some of the stuff you posted, Pax, because I think there's probably some benefit in it, but I'd have to work out how it's actually managed, because I think an equal voting authority amongst all members of an organization could have problems that I could envision. But that democratic process aside, the point that I raised is really, it seems like from an entrepreneurial standpoint, you often have either one person, two people, very small number of people to start a company and take on a significant risk, whether it's financial, whether it's the time spent, and then if in the probably unlikely scenario that the business becomes successful, now it morphs into this larger entity where it employs people, lower level, mid level, and high level, employees, I think there's a value in the initial risk that's undertaken by the entrepreneurs, and they do it because there's financial incentives, both in terms of equity and in terms of income, that incentivizes that type of behavior. So, how do you incorporate that into the philosophy of, democratic social, however you want to describe it, right? Where we start to distribute ownership, across the organization, right? How do you take that into context and incorporate that? That's, I guess I'm struggling to see that from the counter narrative.
All right, Doolittle, we'll go to you, but just 1 second. Doolittle, 1 second.
For example, the company can give out stock options to employees
Right.
in exchange for their labor.
Sure.
And usually that'll come with a lower wage, right, at first.
Yep.
But then eventually, as those stock options vest, then you become a part owner in the company.
I like
so,
that, yeah.
so the
system.
workers can gain a share in the company and a voting share in the company's policies by participating in the company and being successful as employees and being around long enough for those stock options to vest. Yeah, go ahead.
And that voting,
And that's not anti-capitalist, right?
yeah.
That happens today in capital.
And to
Yeah,
John
that's totally
Boy's point, I really like this system because it doesn't give them voting rights arbitrarily just because they work there. It gives them voting rights because they have also taken on a bit of risk by investing themselves into the stock of the company. And therefore means that they're not only invested in what they can get out of the company monetarily, but they're also invested in how well the business does. Right?
Yes.
So
And
I
then
really
as
like
you
that
accrue-
system.
As you accrue more shares as a body, you actually have a workers' representative on the council or the board of directors, the board of stake shareholders. Now you have a voice there that votes and, like a union, would negotiate for you.
Right.
Because now you're a body that can. This is co-ops in a sense.
And all that's great, and I think that's the best way for a business to run, both like practically as well as fairly. But the question, as it always gets to when we get to things like socialism and like communism, and I know those are buzzwords, but just let me go with it, is that like, okay, these are the types of ways we want businesses to run. Therefore, we're going to force them to run this way. And that is a different question, whether or not that's the best way to run a system. Or the other question, and the next logical question is like, okay, just because it's the best, does the state have the right to force companies to run this way? So, and I think that kind of just destroys the idea of a libertarian socialism as it goes, but you still have the remaining problem. So, for the last 10 minutes,
it might not be anarchy. It might not be anarchy, but it is still non-authoritarian.
It's
right?
not authoritarian to tell private businesses exactly how they have to structure their business and have a threat of force if they don't.
No, you're saying you have to. A part of your payment has to be in stocks and bonds, and the share in the company. That's
right, and I like that, but you understand that that's telling a business how they must. I'm actually, hold on, we already do that.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
No, yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's all sorts of terrible.
Stepped on a
There's
rake
all sorts
there.
of terrible things. There's all sorts of terrible things that could happen. Like, let's just say pollution-wise. Okay, just for one, if we don't tell businesses, hey, there's a box you got to work in here to a minute. Like, there's certain lines you can't cross.
Okay, but
You can't,
pollution's a little bit different, but I do see your point.
John,
hold on.
Like when you talk about like the state forcing, businesses to be run as co-ops, like what kind of scenario are you envisioning? Like, the state coming along and telling let's say like Jeff Bezos, like, okay, you got to democratize Amazon now, or like who's being forced to?
Well,
do this?
I mean,
Like,
the scenario I'm
workers as a whole?
envisioning is just when I talk to ANCOMs or Libertarian Socialists, not usually on this server, that's usually what they say. They say, look, I want a democratization of the workplace. And I'm like, okay, exactly how are you going to do that to Amazon? And it's usually crickets.
Right, well, the only way to do it is to steal Amazon from Jeff Bezos.
Basically, yeah.
And
Like, if they're
do it as you wish, right? And the way that they want to do it is to distribute that to the employees.
Say, like, if they're ANCOMs, so like people on the Libertarian Socialist side, okay, so there's like two parts, or broadly speaking, like either they're for like going along finding people to start one from the bottom up, or that's gonna come during the revolution when, the workers seized the means of production and, kick the capitalists out and, basically
Right.
take control.
I guess my point would be if they want to,
I mean,
if they want
that's
to,
the ANCOM answer, really.
right,
Simple.
and that's the interesting thing, right? Because if they start from the bottom up and they just want to outcompete these businesses with their business model, to me that's just capitalism with more morals, basically. And if they do the revolution thing where the new controlling power crushes all the old ones, then you're just an authoritarian land. So this is why I wrote a piece in the War of Ideas when I was younger and stupider. It's not very articulate about why I just don't think that lib left exists really, because of those two things you just described are either authoritarian left or just regular old straight up libertarianism capitalism. Just with a little bit more
I
morals.
don't think people freeing themselves from rule. Well, I mean, is it fair to call that authoritarian or?
I mean, I guess was the French Revolution authoritarian? I don't know, maybe, or it was anarchy. It was one of the two, but it was bad.
But I mean, you're right in saying that. Yeah, people start worker co-ops and they're competing with traditional firms. Yeah, that's not fucking socialism. Absolutely. I mean.
Okay, I'm running out of time here. I would like to get last words. If anybody has a burning desire to say something, please say it and keep it under 30 seconds. Usually I go through the whole room, but I don't have time. So if anybody wants to say something, 30-second last words, go. John Boy, do you have anything burning?
Nothing from me. I yield my time.
Please, thank you. Concept, anything burning?
Currency is indirect bartering. That simple.
You're not wrong. I respect it. Dal, you got anything? Okay, he forfeits. Doolittle. Do you have anything burning? Nope. Dan?
I'm good.
All right, Nivik. Now you're kind of letting me down here. Nivik.
I'm fine.
All right. I'll get to Travis at the end. Saturnus, you have anything you want to add at the end here?
Yeah, I don't think. I think the points you brought up. I think that maybe the biggest issue with state socialism is that power in the government, the ability to just seize everything, can get corrupted too.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe you go the route of incentivizing co-ops instead of enforcing co-ops, and maybe taking away certain incentivizations for big private companies that we already give. But
maybe. Yeah, that sounds a hell of a lot more reasonable than what I usually say here. Snark, you haven't gotten much of a say, so I'm gonna give you more than 30 seconds if you want to say your piece real quick.
Nah, man. I don't have anything to add. Thanks, man.
All right, yeah, we'd love to have you. Please drop in again. I'm seeing a couple new faces. Maybe you're not new. I just don't know you. But please keep coming back. I love new content, new free content. Villain, how about you, man? Any final words? Nope. Zet, you just hopped in, so... Oh, wait, sorry, Villain.
Yeah, Skip.
All right, you're back from the dead. Go ahead, Vil.
My opinion on it can be summed up by... it's basically an opinion on direct democracy, which I think is ludicrous. When I was in high school, I got sent to military school, boot camp school, and I was 4 people participated in a student government thing, and we each had to give a speech. 3 of us gave speeches about things we were going to try to change, like they were feeding us chicken that was undercooked often. We're going to get that stopped, and a couple other things. But the 4th guy just got up there and rambled about nothing. And I'm not going to name the place I went to. Let's just call it boot camp. Let's say that's the name of it. And so at the end of his speech, his really stupid speech, he said, "Boot camp football rules," and he threw his hands in the air, and he won the debate. He won. That's direct democracy. It's idiocracy.
Yeah. I don't think I mean, I appreciate the critique of democracy. It is not it is not put forward enough. Zet, you are brand new, so I'm gonna give you more than 30 seconds.
My fault.
I just joined. I don't know what's the topic.
We're talking about capitalism writ large. Do you like it? Why or why not? And how would you improve it? You have 60 seconds. No pressure.
Oh, I love everything positive about capitalism except the negative externalities and the pollution it provides and shit. So, if anything we can do to get rid of negatives, it'll be fine. But if it's impossible, I don't know what to do, man. That's it.
Beautiful answer. Okay, Zemo.
Yeah,
Yeah, we could talk about economics till the cows come home, but if you look at any great leap forward that's been in human civilization, in our living conditions, it's come from the scientific community, physics, quantum mechanics, everything from the semiconductor to the cell phones to the satellites. Empower the physicists, empower the scientists, give them as much money as we can. I know we don't have control over that right now, us in this room, but the general sentiment, and things will fucking take care of themselves. I promise you that.
I certainly hope so. There's so many other elements to this over hyper consumerism and also, but yeah, we're not going to get to it. Oh, Pax is gone. Oh, Pax is back. Okay. Pax, give it a shot, man. If you have anything.
Answer capitalism versus socialism, which one I prefer?
I just want 30-second. If you have anything that you want to say at the end of this, you have 30 seconds. It's not a specific question.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, socialism or, anarchist communism or capitalism, the tendency for the rate of profit to fall renders capitalism unsustainable in the long run. It's going to collapse in the end, whether you support it or not. So, the question is, what system are we going to replace it with in the long run?
I guess I don't know what you're talking about as far as rate of profit goes, but I guess I need to look into it now. If my system of choice is doomed, I guess we'll see, won't we? Thank you, Travis. Do you have anything you want to say? Last 30 seconds, or are you good? Going once. It's possible he's not there. It is more than likely he's not there. Okay, we're going to move this over to the tavern because I am out of time. I encourage you all to keep talking about this, about hyper-consumerism. Specifically, I didn't get to that, and that's where I kind of get more moral and less, capitalistic in my arguments. But everybody should go down there and talk about that. Anybody who's watching, please, Discord link is in the description. Please join. We have discussions like this every week if I'm doing my job correctly, every other week usually. And please subscribe to the channel because this is one of the only channels that I'm aware of that's all about free and fair discourse without any real perceivable bias. And there's an extreme lack of that in the world and certainly on the internet. So please join up. It'll be fun. It's a good time. You get to talk to me if that's appealing. And you get to talk to all these fine people. So thank you guys so much for coming. I appreciate you. And God bless you. Peace.
Thank you too.
Very welcome.